So an article recently came out from Games Radar regarding Bethesda's future and discussions about their past difficulties and limitations provided by their current engine, the Creation Engine. I'll put the article up now. Former Starfield dev says Bethesda should switch to Unreal Engine 5. If there was one major complaint about Starfield when it launched in 2023, it was that many aspects of the game felt dated, leaning on aging Bethesda Creation Engine tech. Yes, the engine had been upgraded many times. This was the first game built on Creation Engine 2, and there were certainly some beautiful scenes in the game. So much of it felt overly familiar from years-old Bethesda games that players wondered if it was time for a change. At least one former Bethesda dev agrees. Nate Perkypile, a lead artist who worked on Starfield, Fallout and Skyrim, and has now set up his own studio. In a recent interview with Kiwi Talks, he explains why he thinks it's time for Bethesda to move over to Unreal Engine 5 after all this time. I think it's pretty telling that there are some studios with similar tech that have made that leap lately, like CD Projekt Red. It's not to say that it wouldn't be a ton of work, sure, that's completely true. It's not like you're just going to be able to start making the game, but when you have this large tool base and large knowledge base of people you could pull from, it's easier to hire people and ramp up. I'm of the opinion that it's easier to stay relevant and not always try to play catch up. Like, a lot of what was done on Starfield was trying to get all these rendering systems and animation systems up to snuff, and it makes it hard to even actually make the game. The way I describe it to people is it's like you're on a train but also laying the train tracks at the same time, but it's also on fire the entire time. Brilliant analogy. So essentially, his argument is that the Creation Engine and Bethesda's reliance upon it are currently holding the studio back overall, and we're starting to see the age within their current games. So should they switch engines? Would it help them improve or delay them even more? Well, let's get into it and find out, should Bethesda switch game engines? Quick side note, if you're new here and you love talking about video games, especially RPGs like the ones Bethesda have made, please consider subscribing. Okay, back to the video. So let's start with explaining the history of the Creation Engine and how Bethesda came to use it. The Creation Engine is Bethesda's proprietary game engine, based on earlier technology but significantly customized for their needs. Bethesda originally used the Gamebryo engine for games like The Elder Scrolls 3, Morrowind, Oblivion and Fallout 3. Whilst flexible, Gamebryo was seen as a dated engine even in its heyday, with limitations in visuals and stability. Bethesda revamped the Gamebryo base and introduced the Creation Engine with The Elder Scrolls V: Skyrim. It featured significant improvements like better rendering capabilities, dynamic lighting, and support for open world environments. It has since been used in Fallout 4, Fallout 76, and recently Starfield. With Starfield, Bethesda introduced the Creation Engine 2, a more substantial overhaul meant to address criticism of its predecessor. Elder Scrolls 6 has been confirmed to use this same engine. This version focuses on better lighting, procedural generation, enhanced AI, and higher graphical fidelity. So what's the main benefits of using the Creation Engine? Well, first of all, the engine excels at creating open worlds. Bethesda's hallmark is player freedom, and the engine allows for that through layered systems like NPC schedules, crafting, and exploration. Features like dynamic weather, real-time lighting, and NPC AI schedules add immersion. Physics-based interactivity lets players manipulate objects within the game world, adding a unique element. To my knowledge, I think Bethesda are the only game studio that allows you to interact with every object like this. Some people say that it isn't that important, but I've seen a lot of gamers stand up for that and proclaim it as a vital component when it comes to games from Bethesda. So these are all well and good reasons for using the Creation Engine, but there are two major ones to discuss. First of all, since Bethesda has used interactions of this engine for decades, the developers are familiar with it, which speeds up production, as in they know it so well. To change would take a lot of time for them to adjust. time that they currently don't have at the moment. As with anything, it would take time to adapt. See, I use a certain program to make my videos, and now I'm able to make 2 a week, and I'm able to do it quite quickly. If I had to change to a whole new video editing software, there would be teething problems, a learning curve, and general delay within my work. Imagine that, but times it by 100,000. This is exactly what Nate Perkypile was referring to. It would take a long time to catch up. We also have another article here from Bruce Nesmith, the former developer on Skyrim, where he says they should stick with the creation engine. Here's the article. Skyrim lead designer says Bethesda can't just switch engines because the current one is perfectly tuned to make the studio's RPGs. Speaking in a recent interview with Video Gamer, Nesmith outlines why Bethesda's in-house engine still works for the studio despite its age. We're arguing about the game engine, let's argue about the game. He says, the game engine is not the point, the game engine is in service to the game itself. You and I could both identify 100 lousy games that used Unreal Engine. Is it Unreal's fault? No, it's not Unreal's fault. Gamebryo is no longer a business, it hasn't been for a while, but that engine has been constantly tweaked, updated and refined, continued Nesmith. According to the ex-developer, the creation engine has evolved to do exactly the kinds of games that Bethesda makes, the Elder Scrolls, the Fallouts, the Starfields. At this point, it's perfectly tuned to that type of game, and that's why swapping engines wouldn't be ideal. There's that, plus the sheer number of years it would take to implement, and how it would slow down the development of any current projects. That's the penalty side, that's the risk side. So as we can see, the argument is that the engine does enough. It has lots of proprietary tools just for Bethesda. It has world generation, scripting, questing, dialogue, animations that are all proprietary to the creation engine and Bethesda, and they're used to using them. It works well for Bethesda games, does the job that's needed, has been updated over the years, and the whole team is familiar with it. If they switch to a new engine, they'll take too long to become familiar with it, projects will get delayed, and you can see the negatives. The other huge benefit to having this engine is the modding community, the Creation Kit. The Creation Kit is a modding tool for the Creation Engine games. The Creation Kit takes advantage of the Creation Engine's modular nature. It was created by Bethesda Game Studios for the modding community of the Elder Scrolls series. The tool can be used to create worlds, NPCs, weapons, it can fix bugs, make quests, basically all the mods you can think of. Mods created using this tool are hosted on the Steam Workshop, Nexus Mods, among other sites. A new creation kit with the support for Starfield's Creation Engine 2 was released back in June of 2024. Now, going back to the modding community, essentially Bethesda have made the modding experience as friendly as possible and easy to implement. They have, in fairness, offered huge support to the modding community. This has resulted in Bethesda having arguably the most active modding community out of any gaming company. Skyrim released in 2011. It was a fantastic game by its own rights, but since then, as of right now, there are over 70,000 mods available for it. 70,000. That is mental. But it means another thing. Skyrim was born in 2011, and yet it still lives in 2025, as the game is technically still receiving updates every single day. It gives its gamers longer lives and its players more reasons to return. Fallout 4 was launched in 2015, and just recently a game-sized mod was introduced called Fallout London. The reviews have been stellar, but it shows how a game from 2015 is still alive and kicking 10 years later. So, for all their faults, Bethesda have supported the modding community with the creation kit and been rewarded. If you go to Nexus, you'll see the gap between Bethesda's game modding community and the rest of the game section that has mods. Safe to say, Creation Engine and the Creation Kit is a hugely valuable tool for Bethesda's success. So, these modding capabilities, provided by the Creation Kit, has allowed thousands to mod their games, giving their games not just a uniqueness compared to other titles, but also a lifespan that outlasts most other RPG games. So, if they were to change the engine, all of those mod capabilities would disappear, or at least they'd be different and delayed, which could hurt their fanbase. Okay, so if Bethesda switch engines, we're seeing a lot of problems, but why would they change anyway? What's the issue with the Creation Engine? Well, first of all, the aging core technology. Despite updates, the creation engine has long been criticized for retaining foundational code from the Gamebryo days. This leads to issues like janky animations and character models. For example, Bethesda games have limited movement animations. They have walk, slow jog, and run. It transitions poorly, and when you compare it to a game like Red Dead Redemption 2 from Rockstar, that game has motion matching. This is an example of how a game looks better by using other tools. There are also bugs and glitches, which are a staple in Bethesda games. Critics argue that it doesn't always meet modern standards compared to competitors like Unreal Engine. The engine also has performance issues. Bethesda's open worlds can push the engine to its limits, causing frame rate drops and stuttering. This engine doesn't scale well for newer hardware, leading to criticism of optimization. NPC AI and combat systems often feel outdated or simplistic, particularly in the older creation engine titles. And some critics argue that some features, like the dialogue trees, animations, and world interactivity, feel reused or unpolished across titles. But overall, the bottom line is that this engine has created games that look dated and are limited compared to newer titles. If you look at games like Red Dead Redemption 2, Cyberpunk, Witcher 3, Final Fantasy, and so many others, you can see how far Starfield has fallen behind. Compare animations and graphics from these games and it's night and day. What's crazy is that Skyrim looked and felt quite dated even back in 2011. The engine has led to Bethesda falling further behind as the years have passed. So, in the end, Bethesda have stuck with this engine no matter what. Back in 2011, people were willing to accept these limitations and the bugs as they were getting an amazing open world experience. It was one of the only games like it at that time. It wasn't until Fallout 4 that we started to see the gap. Compared to other games that came out in 2015, that bridge began to widen. We also saw more studios release open-world RPG games that could match the standards set by older Bethesda titles. They were no longer alone. Fast forward to 2023, when Starfield came out, that gap was widened even further. Games have evolved, the competition has grown, and Bethesda are still where they were back in 2011. As a result, Starfield received negative reviews, and it's a concern for their future. No matter how many times the engine gets updated, the games will always seem dated compared to other titles. What was normal in 2011 is no longer normal in 2025. The gaming world has moved on, and yet Bethesda are still making the same games that they did even back then. If we played Starfield in 2011, it might win Game of the Year, it might be a masterpiece, but playing it in 2023, it seemed like an outdated concept. The procedurally generated worlds looked bland, the NPCs were dull, the combat was simplistic, the world was limited, all of the creation engine's limitations were on full display. The other question is, well, can Creation Engine 2 do everything Unreal Engine does? Can it just be updated or changed to be able to do everything that they need it to? Well, the issue is that the engine has a lot of things holding it back from actually being innovated on. A lot of mistakes were made in the early conceptions of the Creation Engine. A lot of people compare it to being held up by duct tape, fix upon fix. Rather than be crafted beautifully since day one, it's been tweaked and slapped together over time to just do enough as needed. As a result of this duct tape-like design, it prevents the engine from being upgraded to do certain things. So for example, a lot of games have seamless travel, as in you can travel across the land, into a building, then back outside that building without a single loading screen. This is generally the norm now in the gaming industry, but due to Creation Engine handling physics differently, it makes it so that it would perform horribly if they tried to implement this into their games. That's why Starfield has so many loading screens opposed to other new titles. Again, that was acceptable in 2011 with Skyrim, but in 2024, they'd be possibly the only AAA game studio that make games with that many loading screens. That's a problem. Only by going back and chucking out that whole part of the engine and replacing it would they be able to rectify that issue. But as the physics engine is slapped on with spit and glue, it means that removing that part of the engine, it would impact every other part of the engine, potentially making the problem worse. It would be easier for them, and perhaps less time consuming, to build a whole new engine without the mistakes or move to another engine like Unreal, as opposed to trying to tweak this engine to do what they want it to. So adjusting the creation engine to do what they need it to isn't really an option. They either stick with what they have and accept the shortcomings, or they change the engine completely. So we get to the point of the video and can now answer the question, should Bethesda switch engines? So if they stay the same, they work with an engine that they know well. They can do what they need it to, and it allows full modding capabilities. They can stick to their schedule of releasing games. If they change, it means huge delays on their next project, a loss in some of the proprietary aspects, and it also means no mods, or at least for a while. But by staying the same, they also risk falling behind the competition, even further than they already have. And if Elder Scrolls 6 turns out to be just another Starfield, well, it could literally mean the end for them. So what's the right call? Well, it's a tough one. I think that in order for Bethesda to reclaim their spot at the top of the RPG world, they need to adapt and evolve. If they don't, they'll only fall further behind. I personally think that we have to wait until Elder Scrolls 6 drops. If it drops and it's a huge success, then I guess they stick with it. But if the issues are as glaring as they were in Starfield, they have to change. Look at CD Projekt Red. They made Witcher 3 in Red Engine 3. It looked a lot better than Starfield, even for its time. For Witcher 4, it will be made in Unreal Engine. That shows that other studios are willing to make the changes, as they don't look at what they'll lose, but more what they'll gain. I honestly believe Unreal can do almost everything the creation engine can. The only problem is the mod community. I'm not sure how long it would take to implement something like that on Unreal Engine, if it's even possible, and without their modding community, that could hurt Bethesda even more than not switching engines. But either way, if Elder Scrolls 6 looks as dated as Starfield and they refuse to change anything, then it could spell disaster. It might take time, resources, training, and set them back a few years, but I generally believe that if they do eventually make that switch, it would benefit them greatly in the long run. In other words, I agree with Nate Perkypal, and what a name, by the way. But if I know Bethesda, which I believe I do, I fully expect them to do what they always do. Stick to what they know and refuse to change, no matter how the Elder Scrolls 6 performs. But anyway, that's it for this one, but I really want to hear your opinion. Do you think Bethesda should switch engines? If they lost modding, do you think it would be worth it for a better game? And the fact that you can interact with all objects in Bethesda games, how important is that for you? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a like, and if you're new here, please consider subscribing. I'm Av Gaming, where we do video game analysis, identifying what makes great games great and what could make good games great as well. Thanks for watching. Av out.